Good morning, folks. In this video I want to discuss the implications of the non-random or parent-directed evolution that I discussed in the previous video. If you've not seen that, please watch it for context. Thanks. So, in summary, offspring are not a random mixture of parental genes as described by Darwinism. The mixture is directed by the desires of the parents. So I'm theorising a biological feedback mechanism in which the perceptions of the parents inform and affect the gametes, the sex cells, that they produce. It's not a million miles away from Lamarckianism, but it's still fundamentally different from that as well. So there are three theories here we're talking about. We've got Darwinism, number one, which says that the offspring of a union are a random mixture of their parents' genes. Lamarckianism says the offspring of a union are a non-random mixture of their parents' genes and possibly some new genes that is directed by their physical experiences. My theory is basically the same as Lamarck's, only the mixture is directed by the parents' desires. It's not their physical experiences so much as what they actually desire of their children. Anyway, this is why this topic is relevant to alchemy and the great work, because children are the greatest investment a parent makes in their lives. And this is the alchemy of reproduction. It's how to maximise your offspring's chance in life and the subsequent return to you and to God. And if this is true, then the most powerful genetic engineering tool available is desire. And so we already have all we need to make the world paradise. There's no external machinery required. Our bodies are infinitely more sophisticated and capable than the best human technology. And you can understand why the satanic powers that be might want to keep this quiet, because this empowers people. If it's true, this would empower you to have a huge amount of control over how your children turn out, rather than it just being random, which is what the current belief is. But if this is true, it would also mean that evolution is not just acting on bodies, it's acting on minds as well. And so the evolution of fit minds may in fact be what natural selection is primarily concerned with. Not so much the bodies, mind comes first. Perhaps physical biology is downstream from mind. Perhaps mind creates biology and not the other way around. That is what the Tao tell us, that mind creates matter. This theory suggests that parents whose minds are poorly formed will produce offspring with characteristics poorly suited to their environment. They'll be selected against and fail. Their genome is unfit and is selected against in the usual way. But the reason those genes are poor may not just be bad luck. It could, in part or whole, be an error on the part of the parents. If the parents don't correctly visualise and desire the kind of offspring they think would do well, then the reproductive system has no information to work with, and so its output then might well be statistically random. It would make a shot in the dark. So evolution would favour those who are conscientious parents who use their minds to understand reality as well as they can, which is to seek truth, and use their willpower to desire suitable offspring, which is to desire good. Their offspring will be fitter and will do better because their reproductive system is better informed about what characteristics are required. So this would mean that parents of all species have much more control over how their children turn out than we currently think. It means also that we could improve our reproductive success by improving our minds and our desires. And thirdly, it would be relatively easy to teach people to do this and thus improve the gene pool generally. This would mean nature then passively punishes the offspring of those whose minds are unsuited to reality, as they subsequently suffer from having an inadequate genome and thus being poorly physically adapted. And if true, it sounds a lot like the sins of the father. It sounds terribly unfair for children to have to suffer in this way, given inadequate biology by the failings of their parents, and that they had no control over. But what if those children are the reincarnated great-grandparents of those parents? And this would be karma. The children are inheriting the fruits of their own parenting. They as parents failed to clear their minds and visualise their offspring accurately. They failed to ask God for good children, and so they didn't receive them. And those maladapted children went on to breed inaccurately, and a generation or two later they're reborn directly into the mess that they left behind, but in further maladapted bodies and degraded minds. If God gives you the intelligence to see the truth and you don't use it, would it be fair and fitting to be reborn as a person who doesn't have much intelligence? i.e. if you don't use it, you lose it. Well, my contention generally in this series of Veritopia is that the purpose of the universe is to produce good spirits, which are fit minds or virtuous souls. That's all the same thing. And so it kind of ties in with all of this. So this is the missing evolutionary yang. It's the desire of the parent. The yin half of evolution is the survival of the fittest. It's nature, red in tooth, and it is material survival, and might is right, and we all agree that this happens. This is a fact of reality. But the yang half is the desire of the parent, and this is the will of those who are actually performing the act of reproduction. And it's these two things together that drive evolution. And this is how we fill the gap left by the elimination of random as a scientifically viable concept. It's the desires of the parent which determine the offspring, given the available genetic material to work with. It could explain how speciation and evolution seems to occur so rapidly in the fossil record, and that gradualism hasn't been substantiated. It would also suggest that dysfunctional minds may cause genetic abnormality and dysfunctional physiology in their children. And finally, while hard-coded genes can only be changed by the hard culling of nature, minds and desires can be changed quite easily and without requiring many generations or death. So it's a harsh but fair rule, and it's actually very positive. So is eugenics a wild goose chase? You can read the definition there if you pause the video or whatever. If the human genome is degrading, and it is well known that we are smaller and weaker and less intelligent than our ancestors, then under the current Darwinian theory, the only way to improve our lot as a species would be by eugenics. Without the physical removal of the bad genes from the gene pool, then the trend is towards dysgenics, which is poor genes. And with a random selection of genes, which it proposes, then there's going to be an awful lot of bad genes. Which means a lot of culling. It kind of sounds a bit inhuman. But under this alternative theory, programs of forced breeding are not necessary at all, because genetics is downstream from mind. Genetics is then the product of the desires of the parents, and desires are the fire element, and they're the most intangible and the lightest element of all. Desires can and do change within a single person, lifetime, sometimes within a single day, or within 5 minutes. Desires are very easy to change. It's much, much easier to change your desires than your physical body. So if people, instead of lusting after worldly things, spent their time desiring to be more virtuous, then the genetic makeup of the population could improve rapidly, perhaps. And furthermore, if this is true, eugenics simply wouldn't work. It would never produce the perfect phenotype, or even a good one that was stable between generations. Because unless the minds of the parents were first made perfect, you can't have such a thing as a perfect genotype. And this would apply to all living things. And furthermore, life is desire. You can't stop having desires because life is desire. This is where the Buddhists kind of go wrong. But you can choose your desires. So if you choose to align your desires with God's, then your own bodily desires and things seem much less important. It makes you much happier. And God wants the earth to be like paradise. And, that should be everyone's strongest desire. I mean, what's not to like about that? God wants everyone to be happy, healthy and well cared for by each other, and so should everyone, and if we all did, we would be. That's exactly what's missing in the world, isn't it? If that was humanity's desire, that is what we would achieve. And we don't achieve it because most people don't desire it, because they don't change their will, which you can do, it's very easy. So if instead of holding on to selfish desires for a yacht or a castle, or great learning or popularity, most people desired good for everyone and all life on earth, then that would essentially be the planetary ascension that the New Ages talk about. And it would presumably be the new Earth that the Abrahamics believe in too, when everyone stops being a douchebag and starts actually thinking about each other instead. It's not really such a stretch of the imagination that it could happen. Anyway, I know that many people would object to my mixing the topic of evolution with spiritual matters, but I don't think you can separate them. They're all the same process, and you can't understand one without the other. This is the trouble in science today, is because they try and separate it all from spirit. But you can't have yin without yang. You can't have the shadow without the sunlight. And there are a couple of spiritual principles that support my hypothesis. And the first one is that all creation has free will. God is the principle of freedom, and free will is the highest law. Therefore, God's creatures can choose. he has delegated creation to the creation itself. This is why God doesn't interfere, and this is why he doesn't need to. And also, yang becomes yin, so will or desire becomes matter. This is also a fact of nature. Matter is made from God's desire, it's love. All things are made of desire because there's nothing else available for them to be made of. And if you think about it, the forces of nature are forms of desire. So magnetism and atoms' desire to find the lowest energy state, all that kind of thing, it's all a form of desire just expressed in matter. Anyway, so there was my thoughts about the kind of directed evolution thing. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it interesting. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you soon. Take care.